Malaysia, we're still far behind in terms of having that more aggressive attitude.
The economy is not an engine.
Can the government ensure that public-private partnerships are more inclusive?
It's not an engine like a car, that
Right.
you fix it, you turn it on and you turn it off.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Headlines, your one-stop for all the top stories that made the week's headlines and more. I'm Hazween Hassan.
And I'm Hana Harun. This week, we look back at what Chief Secretary to the government, Tan Sri Shamsul Azri Abu Bakar, had to say recently in an exclusive interview with Media Prima. In his first 100 days as Chief Secretary, Shamsul Azri has made it his goal to inculcate a culture of greater responsiveness in the country's 1.6 million civil servants. He says the focus would be on direct engagement with civil servants and dynamic management, all strategies in place to effect change in the civil service. His participation in the government's approach to reforms is clear, namely addressing deep-rooted issues and promoting core values designed to serve the people.
And separately, he also touched on how Malaysia aims to attract 25 million tourists next year and secure substantial direct foreign investment when the country assumes the ASEAN Chairmanship. He says the country is targeting key sectors like artificial intelligence, renewable energy, and health tourism, and that the role of ASEAN Chairman provides a unique economic advantage that the government is determined to leverage. Now, with us in the studio to help expand this discussion further on the Chief Secretary's ambitions, I have Centre for Market Education CEO Carmelo Ferlito. Carmelo, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure to have you back on. Now, I want to first start off with what he said about FDI into Malaysia. What specific incentives is Malaysia offering to attract foreign direct investment in key sectors like artificial intelligence and renewable energy?
Well, I think Malaysia has a long history of being and developing the country as an FDI hub. So we have a series of packages that date back to the 1990s, developed, I think, with quite an amount of success by MIDA. And I have in mind, in particular, the Principal Hub Scheme or the Pioneer Status. These are all programs that I think have been very successful in the past and have contributed to build Malaysia as an investment hub. More recently, I think we have seen targeted initiatives like the KL20, so something that is more related to the technology sector. And we expect to see something more probably in the realm of the energy transition roadmap. Mm-hmm. But I think what is important at this point as new packages, new schemes, new incentives add up to measures that are pre-existing, probably to sit down and pause for a moment and rationalize these interventions. So to see what is obsolete in the regulation, what needs to be updated, and eventually, and I really believe that the Pioneer Status and the Principal Hub schemes were pivotal in building Malaysia's success, enlarging these schemes to embrace wider categories. So as these programs have been very successful, instead of adding on new targeted programs, we should probably expand on what has been done in the past. Rationalize the regulation, consolidate, and I would say also not look at FDIs simply with the idea that we have to attract the company to put money and build something here, but also at all the regulations that surround later the activities of a firm, of an enterprise in the country. So looking at incentives cannot just be a fiscal thing. Needs to go into, in example, the requirement, the paid up capital requirements, need to go into the labor restrictions, because otherwise you create incentives that are good under one perspective, but then you leave uncover other perspective, and whatever companies come here will have to deal with paid up capital, will have to deal with finding labor, which is not only the high skill workers. If you open an office that deal with AI, in example, at a certain point you also need a cleaner to clean your office.
Sure.
So the economic activity is comprehensive. So when we redesign the schemes, the incentives, I think we have really to take into account all the aspects of an economic activity in the country. So bottom line, pause for a moment, rationalize the schemes to build on the past success for let's say Malaysia 2 or 3.0 as investment hub.
Right. And speaking of making sure that we are all inclusive, right, and encapsulating everything, in a broad area of industries, how then should the government balance between FDIs or foreign investments and protecting local businesses and local interests?
You see, we have we have a situation in Malaysia in which the great majority of our businesses are small businesses. Okay, if we talk about micro businesses, we are talking about 78% of the registered companies under SSN. So we need probably a strategy for consolidation. Right. Of businesses in order for Malaysia to be able also to develop from a technological standpoint. So in this regard, I don't see FDIs as conflictual with the structure of Malaysian capitalism, but rather complementary. So it's a chance for the fragmented texture of our industrial production to enter a bigger supply chain scheme, and eventually build its own strength by leveraging on the relationship with these firms that come into the country.
So you said just now the need for pausing and rationalizing. What are some mechanisms that you may suggest that the country can implement to ensure partnerships with global players lead to long-term economic benefits?
So I think that on one side we should renounce to have measures which are sector-specific. Right. We should embrace a regulation which is more general, like it was for the principal hub, in example. So without being too selective on which kind of investment we want to attract, because in the end investments have a spillover effect, and it is the market that decide what the country economy needs. So we may think that we need to invest in a certain sector, but this may be only our idea as policymakers or policy analysts, but that this is not what the market needs. So let the market speak first. So have the regulation as much as possible open to everybody. And I think another limitation of the past regulation was targeting only extremely high investments. So the incentives were targeted toward extremely big companies. I think we should extend to, I'm not saying to everybody, but probably to a bigger scope of companies. Also from a practical standpoint, let's not forget that companies which are extremely big have a bargaining power with the government, which is particularly high. And in the moment in which they get disappointed with policies, they can pack and go somewhere else. While if instead we leverage our FDI strategy, we build our FDI strategy on medium-sized companies, we are building on companies that can be loyal in the longer term. Because for them it becomes more costly to decide for a relocation. So in the moment in which they decide to come here, they come here usually to stay. They build more stable investments, and usually they tend also to attract more local workforce because they don't go for massive maybe manufacturing processes, so they have quite a sensible spillover effect on employment. So target also medium-size investment, because that is also where the current regulation for setting up a company in Malaysia has a very strong comparative advantage when compared to the neighbors. So the is pretty straightforward to set up business in Malaysia without too stringent requirements, while countries like Indonesia or Thailand are much more restrictive in terms of shareholding, minimum paid up capital, and etc.
Do you think, though, we have that kind of infrastructure to support more medium-sized, smaller investments into the country?
Yes, I would say that Malaysia is designed for that,
Okay.
because is a country where let's say for foreign business people coming in, is relatively easy to adapt compared to neighbor countries. So you don't have a language barrier. Let's say basically you can have a daily routine by speaking in English. You have a very good system of roads, ports, airports, and also very well developed system of public transportation. If you look at it in comparative terms, so we always have to, it may be not perfect, but if you look at the situation around Malaysia, there is not better than here. So Malaysia can leverage on that. Good education system, English-speaking education system, good healthcare system. So I would say that probably Malaysia is the country in which is easier to land for a business at this moment. Doesn't mean that it's perfect or there are things that cannot be improved, but it's relatively easy if you look at the regulatory framework in the region. And this makes it particularly attractive for medium-sized businesses. If you go to Indonesia, where you have with a foreign shareholding a minimum paid-up capital of around $600,000 to $700,000, then you have already put a barrier to entry. So a medium-sized business struggle to enter there.
And speaking of having the proper infrastructure, having the support from government, now I want to move on to public-private partnerships, collaborations between the government and the private sector. Do you see any specific initiatives being developed currently by the government, particularly, to help enhance this further, this collaboration further?
Yes, I think very recently has been launched the new PPP roadmap, which is very welcome and I think a step in the right initiative. And I would push further on this agenda in the sense that now usually the way in which PPP are conceived is that the government decide the target and decide what needs to be done and the specifics of that project, and then the private sector is involved in terms of financing or co-running the project, etc. I would say that probably to further strengthen this approach, we should involve the private sector also at the designing stage. Because the private sector, by operating in the market, has a better sense of what is needed in the market to develop the economy. So responding to market signals is the way to develop also mega projects. For the same reason that we have mentioned before, we may have something in mind, but it may not be what the market actually needs. And I have proposed this kind of cooperation, in example, in the past for the development of transportation infrastructure, like trains and train stations. Why not having the private sector involved in the design, in the decision of which kind of infrastructure has to be built, but then the private sector, and I have in mind in particular real estate developers, property developers, investing, and then later on obviously running the project, running the enterprise and exploiting the economic benefits. So giving also more responsibility at the private sector, on the private sector at this level.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So speaking of wanting the private sector to be more involved, especially in the design level, how can the government ensure that public-private partnerships are more inclusive and that it would benefit a more broader range of industries in the country?
I think that the target should be to do what is needed. So we should not put too restrictive targets in the sense that we must benefit every kind of industry. We need to see where it is important that there is a PPP and where it is beneficial to have the PPP. And there where the dialogue between the government and the private sector is extremely important.
Mm-hmm.
So the point is not really to have PPP everywhere, but to have them where they produce an advantage, where they produce a benefit for the country.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all then?
No, absolutely. You know, the economy is not an engine.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an engine like a car that
Right.
you fix it, you turn it on and you turn it off.
Right.
Once the car is parked for 1 week, then you can turn it on again. Doesn't work like that. The economy, I like to say, is a living, emergent, and ever-changing organism.
Right.
Therefore, it needs to be dealt extremely cautiously
Mm-hmm.
and by observing and respecting this evolution, this spontaneous evolution, which is a bottom-up process.
Mm-hmm.
Wherever it has been tried to have a strong top-down project of the economy has been a big failure, producing starvation and death for the people. So let's respect this bottom-up process.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of that, have there been any ongoing success stories of private sector involvement in government-led initiatives? Maybe would you care to share?
Well, maybe one that we don't think too much because probably it's not big investment or mega projects. But I look at the Talent Corp story. I think is a very nice example of an initiative that is run by the private sector with the guidance from the government. And I think whoever had experience in dealing with Talent Corp as an institution had a very positive experience. They're extremely welcoming. So you see that public services can indeed be provided by private providers with the right strategy, the right guidance, the understanding of the common target. And that, I think, is a very successful story.
How do you think the government can expand on that then?
So one way to look at it is to break the idea that public service means government-provided service.
Right.
Public means targeting the public. Then it can be government-provided or private sector provided, but it remains public. In example, a private school is a public service because it's open. You know, that is it exercises a public function. You know,
Okay.
so even if it's privately run. So something that I think extremely interesting is the idea that the government could, like it has been done with Talent Corp, develop the provision of public services through private providers, because usually costs for private providers are lower. So there is indeed even a saving from the government side. There is a closer attention usually to the consumer, because then the private company needs to have a profit, and you know, so you cannot mistreat your customers because they will not come back otherwise. So there is that logic of service, and the government could contribute. So not by providing directly the service, but by financing the service in the form of, in example, vouchers. Say instead of opening a government hospital, I give the people a certain amount of money that they can spend in private hospital, and the private or a voucher that the private hospital can claim back from the government. These experiments have been tried, in example, in the United Kingdom. It also gives the consumer the feeling of empowerment, because then you don't have an unilateral choice of where to go and get your service. You can choose between different providers. So that, I think, is something where we could explore more.
Now, Carmelo, moving on to our role as ASEAN chairman, our ASEAN chairmanship next year, what do you think the main priorities for Malaysia will be in assuming this role next year?
I think we are at a very crucial point of the history of the world and also of this region. So we have been experiencing mounting geopolitical tensions for quite some time now, not only far away from home, let's say Middle East or Ukraine, also here with the South China Sea, the issue of Taiwan, the BRICS, all these kind of debates. And I think this is the occasion to initiate a reflection on creating more awareness on how peace ultimately is beneficial for everybody. So we should de-escalate tensions. We have seen, and I think Europe is forgetting that, Europe have experienced a strong period of economic growth after World War II, because was the longest period in European history without wars that involved the European territory. World War II was just 20 years after World War I, and before that we had the big war between Prussia and France, and then before that Napoleonic Wars, and then you can go back down to the 100 years war. So politicians after World War II and the politicians that gave birth to the seed of the European Union with the treatises of Rome, and here we have in particular Benelux and then Italy, France and Germany. They were really looking at a situation of granting peace through economic cooperation to grant development and again peace to the citizens of Europe. And I think we should borrow from that experience and really stressing on the importance of peace. This is not the moment, I think, of taking side. Is the moment of embracing peace. You know, I have a small son. Sometimes he comes home, he hears things at school. He asks me, where do we stand in this conflict with this or that? I say, we don't stand with anybody. We stand with peace. So we embrace every effort that can be done to bring peace. And I think historically, ASEAN has expressed a third position in a world that was experiencing very hot or cold conflicts. And I think it's the moment to keep on pushing on that third position.
Right. I think you've already somewhat answered this coming question on how to promote peace. But I have to add, though, Carmelo, I think in comparison to Europe, I think Malaysia, we're still far behind in terms of having that more aggressive attitude towards dissent or anyone, you know, when there are opposing sides. I think we're because of the Asian culture, we're more docile, we're more compliant. So I think we're a little bit far from getting anywhere near, you know, as aggressive as the kind of conflicts you see elsewhere, and not just Europe, you know, elsewhere in the world. So again, on hinging on that, the question of how we can ensure long-lasting peace, the ASEAN chairmanship, you know, what advantage or what sort of privilege does it give to us, Malaysia, to not so much control things, but ensure that it is in place?
privileged position, not only geographical, being somehow in the middle of the region, but also because it's a small country, and as a small country has to benefit from peaceful and open economic and political relations. Is vital for Malaysia. So Malaysia, more than other countries, I think has the interest in maintaining peaceful and open attitude, both politically and economically. And so by understanding, realizing these, involving the other ASEAN partners into this reflection of how openness, peace, and is the way to go, not just ideologically, but really because this is the way that benefits the people. And doing, in example, also very practical move. In example, starting a discussion on the free movement of labor, allowing our people within ASEAN to move in the region to look for opportunities that are more fulfilling for them, and so also to help the allocation of labor internationally. This is a very practical sign, practical measure that show that we believe in building benefits for our people. And the way in which we build benefits for our people is by creating opportunities for them, not by restricting opportunities, not by being closed, but being open. Maybe discussing a more coordinated action in terms of monetary policy. No, so doesn't necessarily need going toward a single currency, because also that, as we see, the experience of Europe is very contradictory. That we have positive elements, negative elements, but a higher level of coordination. So talking about peace and openness is not just an abstract conversation. Means putting on the table those topics in which we can increase the degree of coordination and the degree at which we build ASEAN really as a bloc, not for further contraposition, but a bloc that is inspired by true openness.
Right, mutual understanding.
Mutual understanding. That is how the European Union started. Don't look at what the European Union
is now,
but look at the Gasperi, Schuman, Adenauer, the founding fathers of the European Union, that were not inspired by duties and regulations, or even by the single currency. They were really inspired by building cooperation. In fact, the first nucleus of the European Union was called the Economic Cooperation for Coal and Steel, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. So was the word cooperation was always there. Cooperation, that literally means cooperatio, do things together, operating together.
Mutually benefit from it as well.
So understanding is an area of 1 billion people, so is an important area in the world. I mean, ASEAN, see where we can deepen our cooperatio.
Okay, interesting. Moving out of the bloc mindset and more sort of global here, but still leveraging on multilateral institutions. How does Malaysia plan to leverage partnerships with China and the Gulf Cooperation Council, for example, to drive economic and strategic goals?
We have seen, and I think this has been evident both on Prime Minister Anwar, but also now recently the newly elected president in Indonesia, Prabowo. There is obviously an openness to China. This is undeniable, and I think it makes sense regionally speaking. They say it's the biggest partner, but we have to be sure that this is really mutually beneficial relations. Very important also, and I think the Gulf region is something that we tend to underestimate. And I think this means for the countries in ASEAN really to embrace a multilateral approach, because the idea, of the importance of cooperation, free trade, peaceful cooperation, is not just geographical limited, like it could have been centuries ago, where technology was limiting the possibility of transportation, the times, the risks, and etc. Or obviously, the moment in which the European Union was created, there was a strong cultural element there. Now the world is bigger somehow. So, despite every attempt, we may say that borders are disappearing, so we can move more freely, and we have to keep pushing on that openness. So there is no reason why Malaysia should not look at partners in every part of the world for mutually beneficial relations.
So with Malaysia having the ASEAN chair next year, what role will forums such as the World Economic Forum and Bloomberg play in promoting Malaysia's ASEAN agenda?
You see, these institutions are important, but probably also, I would say, they tend to embrace a top-down approach to things, while I tend to privilege a more bottom-up approach. So an approach that is not imposed on Malaysia by foreign institutions, which can remain, at proposal level, consulting level, trying to see what can be done. But I tend to believe more that we should put more emphasis really in ASEAN, because there is where we are, and there is where there can be a locally born understanding of what is necessary, and the development models that can happen always happen bottom up, and so need to be discovered locally by learning from experiences from other situations, other countries, listening to this forum. But also, these forums they tend to be also extremely theoretical. Allow me, I was in Vietnam at the World Economic Forum a couple of months ago. I was invited. I wrote a paper for them, and there was 2 days long discussion about industrial transformation, about AI, the new technologies. Then you walk in the street, and you have the cables falling down on your head. So there is like a disconnection between what is discussed and these big ambitions, and then what is the reality on the street. And I think we need to strike a balance there. So we should not renounce to these big ambitions, but probably before building certain things, we should be sure that we don't get shocked by a cable that is falling down from a tree on the street. So
look after your own backyard first. Definitely.
So having a more coordinated development. So if you look at Malaysia compared to other countries in the region in terms of this kind of infrastructure, is extremely well developed, and therefore can think about the next step. But you cannot, think about the next step if you haven't done the previous step first.
Well, we've talked a lot about ASEAN now, so I want to move on to our own national goals, especially what the Chief Secretary touched on. So apart from FDI, he also touched on how he wants to get more tourists into the country. So how do you think we're going to get 25 million tourists next year? What do you think the kind of strategies are in place for that?
I think that some strategies have been already developed in terms of facilitating immigration. So the opening of the electronic counters for a certain number of countries, waiving the visas for Chinese tourists. I think these have been important, very practical on-the-ground initiatives, which are very, very welcome. There has been, I think, in terms of promotion, a very strong accent on China. And I think probably Malaysia has been the country that has achieved more in terms of attracting Chinese tourists, and this makes sense also because a lot of touristic facilities have personnel that can speak Chinese, and Chinese from mainland China, they don't have often a good knowledge of other languages than Chinese. And therefore, for Malaysia, having a Chinese-speaking population is an advantage.
It is, yeah.
I think that probably should also be revamped the effort to attract tourists from the Gulf, in the sense that Malaysia offers halal food, surau, so that is something that the tourists from the Middle East look at. So going to this country, can I find a place where to pray? Can I find food that is compliant with my religious beliefs? And this has been a very strong point of Malaysian tourism in the past, and probably need to be revived again. So this is probably one initiative. And for the rest, I believe that the country is already attractive, but probably, this is something more long term. Okay, tourists come here for what? So opening a reflection on that. I come from Italy. Obviously, people go to Italy because it's like a huge museum. Basically,
it is.
Where
History.
History is there. I mean, you go, that building is 1,000 years old. That building is 2,000 years old. So is a church, that church, and etc. So you have history everywhere. So what is the added value, the value proposition that Malaysia has for tourists? Obviously, there is the beach tourism, so all water-related activities.
Yeah.
For many Middle East tourists, or for the Chinese, is a lot related to shopping. Having brands and etc. I think that probably it's time also for Malaysia to revive its own historical tradition. So
No, we have lots.
we
We
have,
definitely do,
but needs to be is not the pitch.
True.
It's not the you don't go out and say come here because of this historical monument, this historical building. So having probably a bigger attention at preserving the cultural heritage and promoting it. First, you have to preserve it, so you have something that has to be decent to be shown there. So building, let's say, developing this love for your history. Love for history is love for the country. You cannot love your country if you don't know the history of your country.
That's true.
And then promoting that history, which is an unbelievable history. If you talk often about globalization, but think about the spicy trade. The spicy trade involved producers in Indonesia, merchant on the Malacca Street, merchant from India, merchant from the Arabic Peninsula, and merchants from Italy, trading spices up to England. So it was a trade developed 600 years ago, or actually more than that, let's say around 1,000 years ago, that go from the Molucco until the UK. This is already globalization. Right. And it's something we never talk, but it's a fascinating history of this part of the world, the spicy trade.
Definitely.
Merchants, the history of merchants here is so fascinating. How the Banda Islands were treated for New Amsterdam that became New York just because of nutmeg. There is so much history there. It's so fascinating. Should be able to sell it.
Definitely.
So we've touched on the unique attractions that Malaysia has or should promote. What about health tourism? What role does health tourism play in achieving our 25 million tourist goal by next year? How is the sector being prepared to accommodate the potential influx of international visitors for health tourism?
I think Malaysia doesn't need to do more on that, in the sense that it's already well placed. It's one of the countries in which the ratio between quality of service and price is one of the highest in the world. Good facilities at reasonable prices. And this, if you travel a little bit around Malaysia, has developed already a system of hospitality surrounding the hospitals. And again, you see how the root of the word hospital and hospitality is the same. That also says something about what hospitals were historically. And so near many hospitals you find a lot of budget hotels, in example, that are able to accommodate the relatives that are accompanying here medical tourists, let's say, or healthcare tourists. So pushing more on that, probably again developing more advertisement, sales, promotion activities, in particular in the region, but also beyond the region. I think there is quite a hunger in the world for good and affordable medical services.
You can. That's the case for Turkey now. It's now the most popular place for people to get hair implants. And do you think Malaysia can somewhat create that sort of image for itself, as in to promote health tourism as well?
I think so. Maybe building on testimonials, and doing traveling initiatives around the region to promote this. I think Malaysia is already well known. If you I travel quite a lot in the region, and I met people in Thailand, in Bangladesh, in Indonesia. Say, okay, when I have medical issues, of course we're talking about relatively wealthy people. When I have medical issues, I go to Malaysia because that is better.
Yep.
And unfortunately, myself, I have quite a long history of medical treatment. So I've been exposed to the health system in Malaysia, and my experience has been extremely positive.
I think we're also quite popular for health tourism among Indonesians.
I think Indonesians, they tend to look at Penang for
Penang,
that. And this is something that didn't need promotion, in the sense the market did the job. So there has been rumors, spread the voice that Malaysia is good for this and for that. We have relatives in Indonesia. They come here for medical tourism, but also don't forget Bangladesh. Wealthy Bangladeshi people tends to come here for medical tourism.
Okay.
The facilities are good, doctors are good.
No question about that. And the fact that it's so affordable.
And it's relatively affordable, yes.
An attraction. Now, Carmelo, unfortunately, we have to round off our discussion. And I thought it would be a good thing to end it on talking about the broader economic goals. Okay, so we've talked about FDI and the key sectors that perhaps the government will want to look into, like AI, renewable energy. How does, it's one thing to have all these plans and initiatives in place, but how does this then translate to securing and creating jobs for Malaysians? Because ultimately, that's what's going to get the economy going. If you don't, if you don't create jobs, how are you going to prop up the economy, right? So what does that do then to ensure that we can create jobs?
I think that investments naturally create jobs for Malaysians. So there is no companies that come here with the purpose of massively hiring foreigners. No companies has the interest to do that. This also have to be clear.
Yep.
You hire foreigners when really you have no choice than hiring foreigners.
Yep.
So both at top level and lower level. So let's put it like that. For a company, and I've done work for corporate world a lot in the past 15 years. For a company coming here and setting up operations here, hiring foreigners is an headache. They prefer hiring Malaysians whenever that skills, that set of skills that they look, that can be at high level, medium level, or low levels, are available. There is no benefit for a company to come to Malaysia and hiring foreigners. So the first choice is hiring Malaysians. Dan kalau tak ada ya, harus cuti-cuti di mana-mana. But the idea is we want to hire Malaysians. So one thing is clear: investments create jobs. I think on this, I want to pick on a recent statement by Minister Rafizi. He said we need to move from made in Malaysia to made by Malaysia.
Right.
I think he was not wrong. Looking at this target in long-term perspective, of course, it's not something that happens overnight. But indeed, and I was discussing this with one of my business partners in Indonesia recently, the next step for this region is going there. So this means having production processes that are built upon ideas and processes that are developed by Malaysian brains.
Right.
So it's not just attracting the investment that create labor, but create the conditions that allow Malaysia or the region in general to start doing things that have been fought locally, not
Right.
just built
Right.
locally, but fought locally.
Yeah.
And this requires, I believe, a radical change in the education system. On this, I'm a voice outside of the majority, I may say. So I believe that this shift can happen not by investing on STEMs, but by investing on humanities. Because
Right.
ideas are developed by critical thinkers. And critical thinking is developed by humanities,
Right.
philosophy, history, geography. Then you have the idea, then you can hire someone that practically develop that ideas. So you need the engineer, the technical people. But the brain process is where we have really to invest. And this is not developed in STEM education, or at least at a certain extent. It's developed by a broader way of thinking. So I embrace and I welcome what Minister Rafizi recently said. And I think that the direction to go there is rethinking our education system.
On that note, thank you so much, Carmelo,
Thank
for
you.
all your wonderful insights. I think we can end the discussion here. We had a wonderful discussion on FDIs and what we can look forward to when Malaysia assumes the ASEAN Chairmanship next year. Before we end, again, I'd like to thank Carmelo for making time with us here on Beyond the Headlines. Thank you so much.
Thank
Hope
you for having me.
see you again
Thank
sometime
you.
soon. Please come back. Yeah,
Thank you. It
welcome
was
anytime.
really a pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Likewise. And Hana, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me,
It's
Hazween.
been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while, quite a while.
Come back more often.
I'll try.
And to those of you watching us and who have been loyal with us all this time, thank you so much again for watching our episodes week in, week out. Unfortunately, it's come to the end for this week's episode. Of course, if you enjoyed this one, please hit that like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel, NSC Online, the channel you're watching this episode on right now. Don't forget to also follow us on all the socials. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and X at NSD Online for all the latest news and updates. Well, that's it. Thank you for watching. This is it for Beyond the Headlines this week. I'm Hazween Hassan, and until the next one, it's goodbye.